A New York financial consultant inherits half of a Texas ranch she never knew existed. But she's about to meet the other heir who's been running this place for 15 years. Jake Sullivan is not happy about sharing his ranch with some city girl. The will reveals they each inherited 50% of the struggling ranch. But there's a clause that will change everything between them. To access $2 million to save the ranch, they must marry within 6 months. Jake thinks it's an elaborate scheme to steal his legacy. Natalie is equally outraged, never having heard of Jake Sullivan before. The ranch is drowning in debt with only months before foreclosure. Neither wanted this situation, but their futures are now intertwined. Jake storms off to sleep in the barn, refusing to share the house. Natalie locks herself inside, overwhelmed by this impossible situation. Both are determined to find a legal way out of this arrangement. But this ranch holds secrets that will change both their lives. Their grandfathers shared a bond deeper than either could imagine, a friendship that would determine the fate of two stubborn strangers. With jealous neighbors, financial pressure, and stubborn hearts against them, can two opposites save a dying ranch and find love? Or will they lose everything trying to prove they don't need each other? This is the ranch inheritance, where love must overcome pride. Tell us where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. The next morning, Natalie's younger brother Tommy arrives from Austin with his legal briefcase. "Nat, I've been up all night going through Grandpa's will," he says, setting down his coffee with a heavy sigh. "I was hoping to find some loophole, some way out of this mess." His expression grows increasingly grim as he spreads the documents across the kitchen table. "But I have to tell you, this thing is bulletproof." Tommy shakes his head in professional admiration and frustration. Whoever drafted this anticipated every possible challenge we could make. "So what exactly are you telling us?" Jake demands, his voice tight with tension. Tommy looks up from the papers with obvious reluctance. "I'm saying you have exactly 2 choices, and that's it," he explains carefully. Option 1. You two get married within 6 months and access the $2 million fund to save this place. He pauses, letting that sink in before continuing. Option 2. You sell everything immediately and split whatever's left after paying off all the debts. Natalie sinks into a chair, the weight of their situation finally hitting her. "And how much will be left if we sold?" she asks quietly. Tommy's expression says it all before he even speaks. "Maybe $50,000 each, if you're lucky." That afternoon, an expensive black sedan pulls into the dusty ranch driveway. Marcus Reed steps out wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably costs more than most people make in a month. Well, he says with his trademark charming smile. "This is quite the rustic little setup you've got here, Natalie." Jake immediately bristles at the condescending tone in the stranger's voice. "And you are?" Jake asks coldly, crossing his arms over his chest. Marcus extends a manicured hand with practiced confidence. Marcus Reed, Natalie's former business partner. The emphasis on former doesn't escape anyone's notice. "Natalie, darling, I've come to rescue you from this impossible situation," Marcus announces with theatrical flair. He opens his briefcase to reveal neat stacks of cash. "I'm prepared to buy your half of this property for 3 times its assessed value." Jake's eyes narrow dangerously at the obvious insult. "You don't belong in a place like this," Marcus continues smoothly. "Come back to New York where you can build the life you deserve." He gestures dismissively at the ranch around them. "Leave all this rural drama behind, and let's get back to making real money in the city." Jake takes a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. "I think you need to watch how you talk about my family's land." The tension is broken by Ruby Sullivan's cheerful voice calling from the front door. "I hope y'all save room for dessert," she announces, carrying a fresh-baked apple pie that fills the air with cinnamon and warmth. Ruby takes one look at Marcus in his expensive suit and raises an eyebrow. "Well now, we got ourselves some fancy company today," she observes with a knowing smile. Jake immediately relaxes at his grandmother's presence. "Ruby, this is Marcus Reed," he says through gritted teeth. "He's here to make Natalie an offer she can't refuse." Ruby sets down her pie and studies Marcus with the sharp eyes of someone who's seen every type of person in her 70 years. Is that so? She muses. How interesting. Later, Ruby sits down beside Natalie and begins sharing the story that explains everything. Your grandfather and Jake's daddy, they had a bond stronger than blood. Ruby begins, her voice soft with memory. It was 25 years ago when that tornado came through without warning. Her eyes grow distant as she remembers that terrible day. Jake's father was out trying to save the cattle when that storm hit like the wrath of God. Ruby reaches over and takes Natalie's hand gently. Your grandfather drove straight into that hellish storm to find him. She continues with emotion. He risked his own life to save a man he'd only known for a few years. Ruby's voice trembles slightly. From that day forward, those two men were closer than brothers. That evening, Hannah Rodriguez arrives to tend to one of the injured horses. Hey, Jake, she greets warmly, her voice noticeably softer when she speaks to him. I got your message about Buttercup's leg. But the moment she notices Natalie standing nearby, Hannah's entire demeanor shifts. Oh, she says coolly, her smile fading. I didn't realize you had company. Jake seems oblivious to the sudden tension. Hannah, this is Natalie Brooks, he introduces. She's the other heir I told you about. Hannah forces a tight smile. The one from New York, she states rather than asks, her tone making it clear what she thinks about city people. How interesting. As Hannah works on the horse, her jealousy becomes painfully obvious to everyone except Jake. So, Jake, remember that dinner we talked about? She asks with forced casualness, deliberately excluding Natalie from the conversation. I was thinking maybe this Friday, just the two of us. She emphasizes the last part while shooting pointed looks at Natalie. When Jake asks Natalie to help hold the horse steady, Hannah's jaw visibly tightens. Actually, I can handle this myself, she interrupts quickly. I'm sure Miss Brooks has more important things to do. Her territorial behavior makes it crystal clear that she's been harboring romantic feelings for Jake for years. Every gentle word Jake speaks to Natalie feels like a knife twisting in Hannah's heart. That night, Marcus corners Natalie in the kitchen for a private conversation. Natalie, you have to see how impossible this situation is, he says urgently, moving closer to her. You don't belong in this backward place with these simple people. His voice carries the smooth persuasion that once convinced her to date him. Come back to New York with me, Marcus pleads. I'm offering you a full partnership in my company. He reaches out to touch her arm. We had something special once, and we could have it again. His eyes grow intense with barely concealed desperation. Don't throw your life away on some ridiculous fantasy about playing cowgirl. Marcus's voice drops to a whisper. You know you're making a mistake staying here. Meanwhile, Jake and Natalie find themselves alone on the front porch under the brilliant Texas stars. It's beautiful out here, Natalie admits quietly, surprising herself with the words. I never see stars like this in the city. Jake glances at her profile in the moonlight. Most city folks think it's too quiet, he says gruffly. Too boring for sophisticated tastes. There's an unexpected vulnerability in his voice that catches Natalie off guard. I keep thinking about what Ruby said, she murmurs. About our grandfathers and their friendship. Jake nods slowly. Your grandfather was like a second father to me after my parents died, he admits. I just never understood why he'd leave half the ranch to someone I'd never met. For the first time since she arrived, neither of them is thinking about escape plans or legal loopholes. The next morning, Natalie marches out to the corral wearing her expensive designer clothes and high heels. If I'm going to make any decisions about this place, I need to understand how it works, she announces with determination. Jake leans against the fence post with his arms crossed, clearly amused. Well then, city girl, let's see what you're made of, he drawls. That's Buttercup. She's the gentlest mare we've got. Natalie approaches the horse with obvious nervousness. She's bigger than I expected, she admits, her confident facade beginning to crack. I've only seen horses in Central Park, and they seemed much smaller. Jake can't hide his smirk. Those are ponies, princess. This is a real horse. Within minutes of mounting Buttercup, Natalie's confidence completely crumbles. Easy, girl, Easy, she whispers nervously as the horse takes a few steps. But her inexperience shows immediately as she loses her balance and tumbles backwards into the dirt. "Oh my God!" she shrieks as she hits the ground, her pristine business suit now covered in dust and hay. Jake doubles over with cruel laughter. "That's got to be some kind of record." He chuckles mercilessly. "Most people stay on for at least 10 seconds. Natalie struggles to her feet, spitting dirt and glaring at him furiously. "You could have warned me she was going to move," she snaps. "I thought you said she was gentle." Jake wipes tears from his eyes. "She is gentle. You're just that bad at this." Determined to prove herself, Natalie decides to collect eggs from the chicken coop. "How hard can it be?" she mutters, stepping into the henhouse. But immediately, the aggressive rooster sees her as an intruder. "Nice chicken. Good chicken," she says nervously as the bird advances menacingly. Suddenly, the rooster charges, and Natalie screams at the top of her lungs. "Get away from me," she shrieks, running in circles as feathers fly everywhere. "Jake, help me." But Jake stands outside the coop, laughing so hard he can barely breathe. "That's Big Red," he calls out between guffaws. "He rules the roost around here." Chickens scatter in all directions as Natalie flails wildly. "This is not funny," she yells, but Jake clearly disagrees. Later, Natalie attempts to help with equipment maintenance and manages to break an expensive hay baler. "I was just trying to help," she says defensively as smoke pours from the machine. "You said to press the green button." Jake stares at the ruined equipment, his face turning red with anger. "I said press the green button after you check the oil," he shouts. "This machine costs more than your fancy car." Natalie backs away from his fury. "I'm sorry. I thought I was following your instructions correctly." Jake runs his hands through his hair in frustration. "Following instructions? You just cost us $3,000 we don't have." His voice echoes through the shed. "Maybe your boyfriend Marcus can write us a check for the repairs." That evening, their frustration explodes into their biggest fight yet. This place needs complete modernization if it's going to survive. Natalie argues passionately. Solar panels, upgraded technology, efficient systems. That's how businesses succeed in the modern world. Jake's face grows dark with anger. "You want to destroy everything that makes this place special," he fires back. "Turn it into some sterile corporate operation." Natalie throws her hands up in exasperation. "I'm trying to save it, you stubborn cowboy." Jake steps closer, his voice rising. "By ripping out its soul and replacing it with computers and spreadsheets." They stand toe-to-toe, neither willing to back down. "You don't understand anything about tradition or family legacy." As their argument reaches its peak, something unexpected happens between them. "You're impossible," Natalie shouts, stepping closer to him. "And you're spoiled," Jake retorts, but his voice has changed somehow. They're standing just inches apart now, breathing heavily from their heated exchange. "I'm trying to help you," Natalie says more softly, her anger transforming into something else entirely. "I don't need help from someone like you," Jake whispers, but his eyes say something different. The air between them crackles with undeniable attraction. They both lean forward slightly, drawn together despite their fundamental differences. For a moment, the barn is silent except for their rapid breathing. Their lips are almost touching when reality crashes back in. Suddenly, Jake jerks away from Natalie as if he's been burned. "This is a mistake," he says harshly, his walls slamming back up. "You're just another city person who'll leave when things get tough." Natalie touches her lips unconsciously, still feeling the electricity of their almost kiss. "Jake, I'm not going anywhere," she says quietly, but he's already backing toward the barn door. "Everyone leaves eventually," he states flatly. "My parents, my friends, everyone who ever mattered." His voice is filled with old pain. "I won't make that mistake again." Natalie reaches out toward him. "I'm not them," she whispers. But Jake shakes his head firmly. "You will be," he says with finality. "They always are." Their moment is interrupted by the arrival of Frank Morrison in his dusty pickup truck. Well, Frank says with a smug grin as he climbs out. "Heard through the grapevine you folks are having some financial difficulties." Jake immediately tenses up. "What do you want, Frank?" he asks coldly. Frank tips his worn cowboy hat mockingly. "Just being a good neighbor," he drawls. "Thought I might be able to help you out of your little predicament." Natalie studies the older man, sensing something predatory in his manner. "And how exactly would you help us?" she asks suspiciously. Frank's smile widens unpleasantly. "By taking this burden off your hands before you embarrass yourselves any further." Frank makes them an insulting lowball offer for the entire ranch. "I'll give you $200,000 for the whole spread," he announces with confidence. "Cash today." Jake's face turns red with anger. "This place is worth 10 times that amount," he snarls. Frank chuckles condescendingly. "Not when it's about to be foreclosed. It ain't." He looks directly at Natalie. "City folk like you don't understand how harsh ranch life can be." His voice drips with false sympathy. "You'll be begging to get out of here within a month." Frank's cruel smile suggests he knows more about their situation than he should. Better to cut your losses now than face the humiliation of losing everything to the bank. His words hit their mark, and both Jake and Natalie feel the sting of his prediction. Just as Frank drives away with his insulting offer, another car pulls into the driveway. Elena Martinez emerges with suitcases and boxes full of interior design materials. "Natalie, this place is absolutely perfect," she exclaims with genuine enthusiasm. "I can already see the potential for an amazing transformation." Jake watches her arrival with growing dread. "Elena, thank God you're here," Natalie says with relief. "I need all the help I can get." Elena starts pulling fabric samples and design plans from her car. "I'm thinking rustic luxury meets modern comfort," she bubbles excitedly. "We can turn this into the most sought-after destination resort in Texas." Jake's expression darkens with each word. "Another city person with big ideas about destroying my family's legacy," he mutters under his breath. The battle lines between preservation and progress have never been clearer. The next morning, Natalie discovers Jake in the ranch house library, surrounded by agricultural journals and detailed business plans. "I didn't know you had a library," she says, genuinely surprised by the extensive collection of books. Jake looks up from a complex financial spreadsheet he's been working on. "There's a lot you don't know about this place," he replies, but without his usual hostile tone. Natalie moves closer to see what he's studying. "Is that a 5-year business projection?" she asks, unable to hide her professional interest. Jake nods reluctantly. "I've been working on modernization plans for 3 years," he admits. "I just don't trust outsiders to understand what this place really needs." Natalie stares at him in amazement. "You have a degree in agricultural business, don't you?" Jake finally opens up about his background and reveals he's much more educated than he lets on. "Texas A&M, agricultural business and ranch management," he says quietly. "Graduated summa cum laude." Natalie feels ashamed of her assumptions about his intelligence. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asks. Jake's expression hardens slightly. "Because city people always assume cowboys are stupid," he explains. "It's easier to let them underestimate me." He shows her his detailed plans for sustainable ranching and ecotourism. "I've been researching ways to save this place for years," Jake continues. "I just didn't have the capital to implement any of it." Natalie studies his work with growing respect. "These ideas are brilliant, Jake. Why are you so resistant to change if you've been planning it yourself?" That afternoon, dark storm clouds begin gathering on the horizon with frightening speed. "We need to get the animals secured," Jake says urgently, his ranch instincts kicking in. Texas storms can turn deadly without warning. Natalie follows him as he rushes to check on the horses and cattle. "Is it going to be bad?" she asks, noting the sudden drop in temperature. Jake studies the ominous sky with experienced eyes. "Could be a tornado," he says grimly. "We need to get everything battened down now." The wind begins to pick up, whipping their hair and clothes as they work together. "What can I do to help?" Natalie asks, setting aside her usual helplessness. Jake looks at her with surprise and perhaps a hint of respect. "Follow my lead and do exactly what I say." The storm hits with devastating force, trapping Jake and Natalie in the barn together. Rain pounds against the roof like machine gun fire, while lightning illuminates the interior in brief, dramatic flashes. That was close, Jake says as thunder shakes the entire building. We'll have to wait this one out. Natalie sits on a hay bale, finally allowing herself to show vulnerability. I've never been in a storm like this, she admits quietly. It's terrifying. Jake sits down across from her, his usual defensive barriers beginning to lower. The first big storm after my parents died, I hid in the same barn, he shares unexpectedly. Ruby found me here, crying like a baby. The intimate confession hangs in the air between them. How old were you? Natalie asks gently. I was 12 when they died, Jake says, his voice heavy with old pain. Car accident on a rainy night, just like this one. He stares at his hands as he continues. They were coming back from a cattle auction 3 hours away. Natalie feels tears pricking her eyes as she listens. Your grandfather was the only father figure I had after that, Jake continues. He taught me everything about being a man, about responsibility, about what family really means. He looks up at Natalie with raw emotion in his eyes. That's why I can't understand why he'd leave half of this place to a stranger. Natalie's heart breaks as she realizes the depth of his hurt. Maybe he knew we both needed something we could only find together, she whispers. The words surprise them both with their honesty. Natalie feels compelled to share her own painful history. I lost my parents when I was 15, she says quietly. House fire while I was at a sleepover. Jake's expression immediately softens with understanding. I'm sorry, he says sincerely. I didn't know. Natalie continues, her voice trembling slightly. I threw myself into school and worked to avoid dealing with the pain. She looks around the barn thoughtfully. I built this perfect life in New York, but I was always running from something. Jake nods knowingly. Running never works, he says gently. The pain just follows you wherever you go. Their shared trauma creates an unexpected bond between them. Maybe that's why Grandpa brought us together, Natalie suggests. Two people who understand loss. As the storm rages outside, Jake and Natalie find themselves drawn together by their shared vulnerability. I'm sorry I've been so hostile, Jake says quietly, moving closer to where she sits. I don't handle change very well. Natalie meets his eyes directly. I'm sorry I assumed you were just some stubborn cowboy, she replies. You're obviously much more than that. The air between them becomes charged with a different kind of electricity than the lightning outside. Natalie, Jake whispers, reaching out to touch her face gently. She doesn't pull away this time. I know this is crazy, she breathes. We barely know each other. Jake's thumb traces her cheek softly. Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need, he murmurs. They lean toward each other slowly, both knowing this kiss will change everything between them. Just as their lips are about to meet, Hannah's voice cuts through the storm. Jake, are you in there? She calls out frantically. I was worried about you when the storm hit. Jake and Natalie spring apart guiltily as Hannah bursts through the barn door, soaking wet from the rain. Oh, Hannah says, her face falling as she sees them sitting so close together. I didn't realize you were busy. Her voice drips with barely concealed jealousy and hurt. I just wanted to make sure you were safe, she continues, her eyes fixed on Jake. The roads are flooded, so I can't get home tonight. Jake runs his hand through his hair awkwardly. Of course, Hannah. You can stay in the guest room. The romantic moment between Jake and Natalie has been completely shattered. Later that evening, Natalie overhears Marcus on a phone call that changes everything. Yes, I understand the timeline, Marcus says in a low voice. But I need more time to convince her. Natalie freezes in the doorway, realizing he doesn't know she's listening. The property acquisition has to happen before the bank forecloses, Marcus continues. My investors are getting impatient. He pauses, listening to whoever is on the other end. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet, he says with confidence. She still thinks I'm here to help her. Natalie's blood runs cold as she realizes Marcus has been lying to her from the beginning. Trust me, she'll take the deal once she realizes how impossible this marriage arrangement really is. Her heart pounds as the truth becomes clear. Marcus isn't here to save her. He's here to steal the ranch. Natalie storms into the living room to confront Marcus about his deception. Who were you really talking to on that phone call? She demands angrily. Marcus's smooth facade immediately cracks. "Natalie, you don't understand the complexity of the situation," he says, trying to maintain his charm. "I'm trying to help you." But Natalie isn't buying his lies anymore. "Help me? Or help yourself to my inheritance?" she fires back. Jake appears in the doorway, having heard the raised voices. "What's going on?" he asks suspiciously. Marcus realizes his game is up and drops all pretense. "Fine," he says coldly. "You want the truth? This ranch is worthless to you, but valuable to my development company." His mask finally slips completely. "I'm offering you a way out before you lose everything like the naive little girl you've always been." Jake steps protectively closer to Natalie, his fists clenched with rage. Before sunrise, Frank Morrison begins his campaign of sabotage against the struggling ranch. Working under cover of darkness, he cuts several sections of the perimeter fence with wire cutters. "Let's see how they handle this little problem," he mutters to himself with cruel satisfaction. As the sun rises, Jake discovers their cattle wandering freely along the main road. "What the hell?" Jake shouts, seeing dozens of animals scattered across dangerous terrain. "The fence was fine yesterday." He immediately calls Natalie and Tommy to help round up the livestock before someone gets hurt. "This is going to cost us hours of work," Jake says angrily. "And if one of these animals causes an accident, we could be sued for everything." The timing couldn't be worse with their financial situation already so precarious. Later that week, they discover their water supply has been mysteriously contaminated with diesel fuel. "The horses won't drink it," Jake says with growing frustration. "And we can't use contaminated water for anything." Natalie examines the pump system with him, both trying to understand how this happened. "Could it be an accident?" she asks hopefully. Jake shakes his head grimly. "Diesel doesn't just accidentally end up in a water well," he states. "Someone did this deliberately. The cost of cleaning and replacing the entire water system will drain their remaining emergency funds. We'll have to truck in clean water for the animals," Jake explains. "That's going to cost us $500 a day until we can fix this." Natalie feels sick realizing how vulnerable they really are to this kind of sabotage. Meanwhile, Frank has been spreading malicious rumors throughout the local community. "That city woman is going to destroy everything we stand for," he tells a group of ranchers at the local diner. "Mark my words, she'll turn that place into some fancy resort for rich tourists." Jake and Natalie overhear him as they enter for lunch. "Traditional ranching will be dead if we let outsiders take over," Frank continues loudly. "Pretty soon, none of our ways will matter anymore." Several local ranchers nod in agreement, clearly influenced by his words. Jake Sullivan's letting some New York princess ruin his family's legacy, Frank adds with calculated malice. Jake's face turns red with anger, but Natalie places a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't give him what he wants," she whispers. But the damage to their reputation is already being done. That evening, Hannah arrives with what appears to be concerned advice for Jake. "I'm worried about you," she says, sitting closer to him than necessary. "Everyone in town is talking about how that woman is changing you." Jake looks uncomfortable with her proximity, but doesn't move away. "Natalie's not what I expected," he admits honestly. Hannah's expression darkens at his defense of Natalie. "Jake, she's going to leave you," Hannah says urgently. "City people always do when things get hard." She places her hand on his arm possessively. "I've been here for you through everything," she continues. "I would never abandon you like she will." Hannah's voice becomes more desperate. "You know I care about you, more than just as a friend." Her confession hangs in the air between them. From inside the house, Natalie accidentally overhears Hannah's confession and Jake's response. "Hannah, you're a good friend," Jake says gently. "But my situation with Natalie is complicated." Hannah presses closer to him. "It doesn't have to be complicated," she insists. "Choose someone who belongs in your world." Natalie feels her heart sink as she listens to their intimate conversation. "You don't know Natalie like I'm starting to," Jake replies, but his voice lacks conviction. "She's stronger than she looks." Hannah laughs bitterly. "Strong enough to give up her fancy New York life for this place?" she challenges. "Strong enough to stay when things get really tough." Natalie realizes that Hannah is voicing all of Jake's deepest fears about their relationship. The seeds of doubt are being planted expertly. Tommy makes a disturbing discovery while researching their legal and financial situation. "I've been digging into Frank Morrison's background," he announces grimly. Turns out he's not just a neighboring rancher. He shows them documents on his laptop screen. Frank owes money to the same creditors who are foreclosing on this place. Tommy explains. If your ranch fails, he stands to benefit financially. Jake stares at the evidence with growing anger. "You mean he's been sabotaging us deliberately?" he asks. Tommy nods seriously. It gets worse. Frank has connections to a development company that wants to buy up all the ranch land in this area. Natalie feels sick as the scope of the conspiracy becomes clear. He's not just trying to hurt us, she realizes. He's trying to destroy the entire ranching community. The pressure and sabotage finally caused Jake and Natalie to have their worst fight yet. "This is all your fault," Jake shouts angrily. "None of this would be happening if you hadn't shown up here." Natalie fires back with equal fury. "I didn't ask for any of this either," she yells. "You think I wanted to inherit half of a failing ranch?" Jake's voice is filled with accusation. "You brought all these problems with you. Marcus, the attention, the changes." He gestures wildly at their surroundings. "Everything was fine before you arrived." Natalie feels tears of anger and hurt stinging her eyes. "Phoenix, you call drowning in debt and facing foreclosure fine," she counters. "At least I'm trying to save this place instead of just wallowing in the past." Her words hit Jake like physical blows. Their argument escalates to dangerous levels as both say things they can't take back. "You're just like everyone else who's ever left me," Jake accuses harshly, using pretty words until something better comes along. Natalie's temper finally snaps completely. "And you're just a coward who's afraid of taking any risks," she shouts back. "You'd rather lose everything than trust someone new." Jake's face contorts with rage and pain. "Trust you? You're probably planning to take Marcus's deal the minute things get too hard," he snarls. "Prove me wrong and stay when this gets really ugly." Natalie stares at him with hurt and disbelief. "I can't believe you think so little of me," she says, her voice breaking. "Maybe Hannah's right about us being incompatible." The mention of Hannah's name makes Jake flinch with guilt. That night, Marcus makes his final play with a tempting offer that could solve all of Natalie's problems. "I'm leaving for New York tomorrow," he announces. "This is your last chance to come back to civilization." He opens his briefcase to reveal a contract worth millions. "Full partnership in my company, plus enough money to pay off all the ranch debts," he offers smoothly. "You can walk away from this mess with your dignity intact." Natalie stares at the life-changing offer with genuine temptation. "All you have to do is sign this contract and get in the car with me," Marcus continues. "Leave the cowboy to figure out his own problems." He leans closer persuasively. "You don't owe him anything, Natalie. Your grandfather's crazy scheme doesn't have to ruin your life." The contract represents everything she thought she wanted: security, success, and escape from this impossible situation. Alone in her room that night, Natalie seriously considers accepting Marcus's offer and leaving Texas forever. She starts packing her suitcase while staring at the contract that would solve all her financial problems. "Maybe this was all a mistake," she whispers to herself, folding her designer clothes. "Maybe Jake's right and I don't belong here." She picks up the contract and reads through the terms again. The offer is generous enough to pay off the ranch debts and still leave her wealthy. "I could save the ranch and get my life back," she reasons aloud. But as she looks around the rustic bedroom that started to feel like home, doubt creeps in. "Or am I just running away again like I always do?" she asks herself. The weight of the decision feels overwhelming as she realizes that leaving would mean giving up on Jake and everything they might have together. The next morning, Ruby sits down with Natalie for a conversation that will change everything she thought she knew. "Child, there's something I need to tell you about your grandfather," Ruby begins gravely. "Something that explains why he brought you and Jake together." Natalie sets down her coffee cup, sensing the importance of this moment. "What do you mean?" she asks quietly. Ruby takes a deep breath before continuing. Your grandfather carried a terrible burden for over 20 years, she explains. He blamed himself for what happened to Jake's parents. Natalie feels her stomach drop. What are you talking about? She whispers. Ruby's eyes fill with tears as she prepares to reveal the devastating truth. Jake's parents were killed coming back from a trip they took at your grandfather's request. Ruby continues with the heartbreaking details that Natalie never knew. Your grandfather had asked Jake's father to look at some cattle he was thinking of buying 3 hours away, she explains with a trembling voice. It was supposed to be a simple day trip. Natalie's hands shake as she realizes the implications. They were driving back in that terrible rainstorm when their car skidded off the road. Ruby continues. Your grandfather never forgave himself for sending them out that day. Tears stream down Natalie's face as the weight of this revelation hits her. He felt responsible for orphaning that sweet boy, Ruby adds softly. Jake never knew the real reason for the trip. The elderly woman reaches over and takes Natalie's hand. Your grandfather didn't leave you half this ranch out of spite, honey. He left it to you because he hoped you'd take care of Jake like family. Meanwhile, Jake makes his own emotional discovery while cleaning out old storage areas in the barn. Hidden in a dusty box, he finds a collection of letters written by Natalie's grandfather over the years. What are these? He murmurs to himself, recognizing the familiar handwriting. As he reads the first letter, his eyes widen with shock. My dear Jake, the letter begins, I hope you can forgive an old man's guilt. Jake's hands tremble as he continues reading. I sent your father on that trip, and I've lived with the weight of that decision every day since. Letter after letter reveals the depth of the old man's love and remorse. You became the son I never had, but I could never tell you the truth about that terrible night. Jake sinks onto a hay bale, overwhelmed by emotions he doesn't understand. Jake continues reading through the letters, each one revealing more of the grandfather's true feelings. I know you'll be angry when you learn about Natalie, one letter reads. But she lost her parents too, just like you did. Jake wipes tears from his eyes as he understands the connection. I'm hoping that two wounded souls can heal each other, the letter continues. She has the strength you need, and you have the heart she's been missing. Another letter reveals even more. I've set up the marriage requirement not to force you, but to give you both time to see what I see. Jake's voice breaks as he reads aloud. You both deserve love, but you're too scared to reach for it on your own. The final letter is the most emotional of all. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, but my love for you lives on in every word I've written. That evening, Jake and Natalie encounter each other in the kitchen, both still reeling from their emotional discoveries. Natalie, Jake begins, then stops, unsure how to express what he's learned. Ruby told me about the trip, Natalie says quietly, her voice still thick with emotion. About why my grandfather felt responsible. Jake nods, his own eyes red from crying. I found his letters, he admits. He wrote about you, about us, about everything. They stand in awkward silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what they've learned. He really loved you, Natalie whispers, like you were his own grandson. Jake's voice cracks as he responds. And he wanted me to love you like you were my family too. The weight of their grandfather's hopes and dreams hangs heavy in the air between them. They spend the evening reading through all the letters together, finally understanding their grandfather's true intentions. Listen to this one, Natalie says, her voice soft with wonder. Natalie has been running from love her whole life, just like Jake has been hiding from it. Jake looks up at her with new understanding. He saw right through both of us, he admits, even before we met each other. Natalie continues reading. I pray that my death will bring them together instead of driving them apart. She looks at Jake with tears in her eyes. He orchestrated all of this because he believed we could save each other. Jake reaches over and takes her hand gently. Maybe he was right, he says quietly. Maybe we have been running from the same thing. For the first time since they met, they're truly seeing each other without walls or defenses. Their moment of connection is shattered when a bank official arrives with devastating news about their timeline. I'm here to inform you that the foreclosure has been accelerated, the stern woman announces. You now have 30 days instead of 6 months. Jake feels his world collapsing around him. What do you mean accelerated? He demands angrily. We were told we had more time. The bank official checks her paperwork coldly. Recent property assessments and financial irregularities have changed the situation, she explains. You can either pay the full amount owed within 30 days, or the property will be seized. Natalie grabs Jake's arm as the reality hits them. How much do we owe? She asks with growing dread. $2.7 million, the woman states flatly. Cash only. That night, Marcus arrives with what he claims is his final offer and ultimatum. The bank acceleration changes everything, he says with false sympathy. I can pay off all the debts today if you'll just be reasonable. He presents a new contract with revised terms. Full partnership in my company, plus I'll clear all the ranch debts as a signing bonus, Marcus offers. But this offer expires at midnight tonight. Jake stands behind Natalie, his jaw clenched with tension. Don't pressure her, he warns dangerously. Marcus ignores him completely. Natalie, you have to face reality. Marcus continues urgently. You can't save this place by marrying some cowboy in a ridiculous fairy tale arrangement. His voice becomes more insistent. Come with me tonight, and all your problems disappear. The weight of the decision feels crushing as Natalie realizes this might be their only real option. Alone in her room, Natalie faces the most difficult decision of her life. In one hand, she holds Marcus's contract that represents security and escape. In the other hand, she holds her grandfather's letters that represent love and family. What would you want me to do, Grandpa? She whispers to the empty room. She reread his words about Jake needing someone strong enough to stay when things get difficult. But am I strong enough? She asked herself honestly. Marcus's offer would solve all their financial problems and give her the successful life she always thought she wanted. But Jake represents something she never thought she could have, a real home and genuine love. I could take Marcus's money and pay off the ranch debts, she reasons. Then Jake could keep his family land, even if I leave. The selfless option appeals to her heart, but she wonders if it would really save Jake or just break both their hearts. As midnight approaches, Natalie makes her choice and finds Jake waiting in the kitchen. I've decided what I'm going to do, she announces with quiet determination. Jake's face is tense with anticipation and fear. I'm going to accept Marcus's offer, she says, and Jake's heart visibly breaks. But not for the reasons you think, she continues quickly. I'm going to take his money and use it to pay off all the ranch debts. Jake stares at her in confusion. Then I'm going to tear up the partnership contract and stay here with you, she declares firmly. The ranch will be saved, and we can build something real together. Jake's expression transforms from despair to hope. Natalie, you can't give up that kind of money for me, he protests. Yes, I can, she says with conviction. Because my grandfather was right. Some things are worth more than money. She reaches for his hand. Are you willing to take that leap of faith with me? The next morning, Jake accidentally overhears part of a conversation between Natalie and Marcus that breaks his heart. You know this cowboy thing was never going to work, Marcus says confidently. You're too sophisticated for this kind of life. Jake freezes outside the kitchen door, his worst fears coming true. I've been thinking about your offer, Natalie responds, and Jake doesn't hear the full context. Maybe you're right about us being incompatible, she continues. Jake's face crumbles with pain as he hears what sounds like Natalie agreeing to leave with Marcus. I can't keep pretending this fairy tale arrangement will work, Natalie says. Jake backs away from the door, feeling like his world is collapsing around him. He never hears the rest of the conversation where Natalie explains her real plan to save the ranch. Jake storms into the living room to confront Natalie about what he thinks he heard. So you've made your decision, he says with barely controlled emotion. You're leaving with Marcus after all. Natalie looks at him in confusion. Jake, what are you talking about? She asks. I heard you in the kitchen, he says, his voice breaking. Talking about how this was never going to work. Natalie realizes he only heard part of their conversation. You don't understand, she begins, but Jake cuts her off. Understand perfectly, he says bitterly. Hannah was right. You were always going to leave when things got tough. His words are filled with deep pain and anger. Just like everyone else in my life. Natalie reaches toward him desperately. Jake, please let me explain. Later that day, Hannah finds Jake in the barn and sees her opportunity to make her move. I heard Natalie's leaving with Marcus, she says with false sympathy. I'm so sorry, Jake. She moves closer to him as he struggles with his emotions. I tried to warn you this would happen. Hannah continues gently. City people never stay when things get real. Jake looks up at her with pain-filled eyes. Maybe you were right all along. He admits defeat. Hannah takes his hands in hers. Jake, I've loved you for years, she confesses boldly. I would never leave you like she did. She steps closer to him. Choose someone who belongs in your world, she pleads. Choose someone who will never abandon you. For a moment, Jake considers her offer, the safe, predictable option that represents everything familiar and comfortable in his life. Meanwhile, Tommy and Elena work frantically together to create a comprehensive business plan that could save the ranch without requiring the grandfather's fund. If we can attract enough investors for the resort concept, we might not need that $2 million, Tommy explains as he runs financial projections. Elena spreads her architectural drawings across the desk. The resort idea is solid, she says with professional confidence. Luxury ranch experiences are huge right now. She points to her designs. We keep all the authentic elements that Jake loves, but add amenities that wealthy guests expect. Tommy nods as he studies her plans. Boutique accommodations, gourmet dining, authentic cowboy experiences, he lists. The profit margins could be incredible. Elena's excitement grows. We could have wedding packages, corporate retreats, adventure tourism, she adds. This place could be booked solid year-round. That evening, Frank Morrison escalates his sabotage to deadly levels by setting fire to the equipment shed. Hidden in the shadows, he watches with satisfaction as flames begin to engulf the building that houses expensive machinery. Let's see them recover from this, he mutters coldly. The fire spreads quickly, threatening to jump to the nearby stables where the horses are kept. Within minutes, the blaze becomes a serious emergency that could destroy the entire ranch. Thick smoke billows across the property as Frank drives away, leaving no evidence of his involvement. The timing is deliberate. With Natalie apparently leaving and Jake emotionally destroyed, no one is thinking clearly enough to respond quickly. Frank knows this fire could be the final blow that forces them to sell to him for pennies on the dollar. Jake sees the fire from the barn and immediately runs toward the burning equipment shed without thinking of his own safety. The horses, he shouts as he realizes the flames are spreading toward the stables. We have to get them out. Natalie sees him running toward danger and screams after him. Jake, don't go in there, she yells, but he's already disappeared into the smoke. She immediately calls 911 while running after him. There's a fire at Double Creek Ranch, she tells the dispatcher urgently. We need fire trucks and ambulances now. The situation becomes increasingly desperate as the wind picks up and spreads the flames faster. Jake, Natalie screams into the smoke-filled night. Where are you? Her worst nightmare is coming true as she realizes she might lose him just when she's finally ready to fight for their love. Inside the stable, Jake works frantically to lead the terrified horses to safety as smoke fills his lungs. Come on, girl. He coaxes a panicked mare while smoke burns his eyes. We're getting out of here. One by one, he manages to get most of the animals out, but the smoke is getting thicker and the heat more intense. Just as he's leading out the last horse, a burning beam crashes down and pins his leg to the ground. Help, he shouts, but his voice is weak from smoke inhalation. Jake tries desperately to lift the heavy beam, but it's too much for him alone. He can feel his strength fading as the smoke overwhelms him. Natalie, he whispers, realizing he might never get to tell her how he really feels. The irony isn't lost on him that he's about to die, saving the ranch, just when he thought he was losing it anyway. Natalie finds Jake trapped under the beam and immediately springs into action to save him. Jake, I'm here, she shouts, coughing from the smoke as she tries to lift the heavy wood. Don't try to talk, just help me push. With adrenaline-fueled strength, she manages to lift the beam just enough for Jake to pull his injured leg free. Can you walk? She asks urgently as flames surround them. Jake leans heavily on her as they stumble toward the exit. "I thought you were leaving with Marcus," he gasps through the smoke. "Never," Natalie says firmly as she supports his weight. "I'm never leaving you." They emerge from the burning stable just as the fire trucks arrive. Natalie helps Jake to safety, both of them coughing and covered in soot. "You saved my life," Jake whispers as paramedics rush toward them. "You saved mine first," Natalie replies, tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. At the hospital, Natalie refuses to leave Jake's side as he recovers from smoke inhalation and his leg injury. "The doctors say you'll be fine," she tells him softly, holding his hand. "But you scare me to death." Jake looks at her with new understanding. "I thought I heard you agreeing to leave with Marcus," he admits weakly. "I only heard part of your conversation." Natalie squeezes his hand gently. "I was telling him I would take his money to save the ranch, but I was never going to leave with him," she explains. "The plan was to pay off all the debts and then tell him to go to hell." Jake's eyes fill with tears of relief. "You would give up millions of dollars for me?" he asks in wonder. "For us," she corrects him. "I realize that money can't buy what we have together." She leans closer to him. "I love you, Jake Sullivan, and I'm not going anywhere." Jake finally drops all his walls and admits his true feelings. "I love you too, Natalie," he says with emotion thick in his voice. "I have since that night we almost kissed in the barn." He reaches up to touch her face gently. "I was just too scared to believe someone like you could love someone like me." Natalie leans into his touch. "Someone like me needed someone exactly like you," she whispers. "You taught me what home really feels like." They kiss softly, finally allowing themselves to feel the love they've been fighting. "So what happens now?" Jake asks quietly. "Now we save our ranch together," Natalie says with determination. "As partners, as equals, and as people who love each other enough to fight for what matters." Jake smiles despite his injuries. "Think we can make this crazy arrangement work?" he asks. "I think we already have," Natalie replies, kissing him again. Outside the hospital room, Tommy and Elena smile as they witness the moment they've all been hoping for. As Jake sleeps peacefully in his hospital bed, Natalie has a profound epiphany about her true feelings and priorities. "I almost lost him," she whispers to herself, studying his peaceful face. "I almost lost the most important thing in my life because I was too scared to admit I love him." She gently traces his hand with her finger, careful not to wake him. "Money, success, my old life in New York. None of it matters compared to this," she realizes with crystal clarity. "I don't just want to save the ranch because of some obligation to Grandpa," she continues softly. "I want to save it because it's our home." The revelation fills her with a sense of purpose she's never felt before. "This is where I belong, and Jake is who I belong with." Her voice grows stronger with conviction. "I'm going to fight for this love, and I'm going to win." While Jake recovers, Elena and Tommy work tirelessly to implement their resort plan with new urgency. "We can rebuild the equipment shed as part of the main lodge," Elena explains, sketching rapidly on her tablet. "Turn this disaster into an opportunity." Tommy takes measurements and notes as they survey the fire damage. "Insurance will cover the basic rebuilding," he calculates. "But if we upgrade during reconstruction, we can create something amazing." Elena's creative mind is already envisioning the possibilities. "Rustic luxury suites where the old shed stood," she describes enthusiastically. "And we can use reclaimed wood from the burned building to maintain the authentic feel." Tommy grins at her ingenuity. "You're brilliant," he says admiringly. "This could actually work better than our original plan." They work with the efficiency of people who know they're running out of time, but refuse to give up. Tommy presents their comprehensive business plan to a group of potential investors in town. Double Creek Ranch Resort represents a unique opportunity in the luxury tourism market, he explains professionally. "We're projecting full occupancy within 18 months. The investors lean forward with interest as he shows them Elena's stunning designs. "Authentic ranch experiences combined with five-star amenities," Tommy continues. "Wedding packages alone could generate $500,000 annually." One investor raises her hand. "What makes you different from other ranch resorts?" she asks. Tommy smiles confidently. "Genuine authenticity," he replies. "This isn't a themed experience. It's a real working ranch with a century of history." Another investor nods approvingly. "And you have a local community support?" he inquires. "We're working on that," Tommy admits honestly. But the economics speak for themselves. When Natalie returns from the hospital, she finds Marcus waiting with his contract and delivers her final answer. "I've made my decision, Marcus," she announces with unwavering determination. And the answer is no. Marcus's confident facade immediately cracks. "Natalie, be reasonable," he pleads. "You're making an emotional decision that will ruin your life." She looks at him with newfound clarity and strength. "No, Marcus," she says firmly. "I'm making the first truly smart decision of my life." She tears up his contract and lets the pieces fall to the floor. "I don't need your money or your partnership," she continues. "I have something much more valuable here." Marcus's mask finally slips completely. "You're choosing some cowboy over financial security?" he asks incredulously. "I'm choosing love over fear," Natalie replies with conviction. "Something you'll never understand." Tommy takes matters into his own hands by setting up surveillance equipment to catch Frank in the act of sabotage. "If we can get evidence of Frank's criminal activity, we can stop him permanently," he explains to Elena as they hide cameras around the property. "These motion-activated cameras will record everything," Tommy says, adjusting the angle on one device. "And I've installed audio recording equipment near the fence line where he's been cutting the wire." Elena helps him camouflage the cameras with natural materials. "You think he'll try something else?" she asks nervously. Tommy nods grimly. "Frank's desperate now," he explains. "The fire didn't finish us off, so he'll escalate again." He checks his phone for the camera feeds. "This time, we'll be ready for him." Elena admires his determination. "You really love your sister, don't you?" she observes. "She deserves to be happy," Tommy replies simply. Tommy's surveillance plan pays off when they catch Frank red-handed attempting another act of sabotage. "We got him on video, cutting the fence again," Tommy tells the police officer as he shows the footage on his laptop. And here's audio of him admitting to starting the fire. The officer studies the evidence carefully. "This is definitely enough for arson and criminal mischief charges," he confirms. "Frank Morrison, you're under arrest," the officer announces as he approaches Frank's truck. Frank tries to deny everything, but the evidence is overwhelming. "You can't prove anything," Frank shouts as handcuffs are placed on his wrists. "Actually, we can prove everything," Tommy says with satisfaction. Thanks to modern technology. As Frank is led away, Tommy feels a sense of justice for all the pain the man has caused. "That's for Jake and Natalie," he says quietly. The removal of Frank's threat lifts a huge burden from everyone's shoulders. That evening, Ruby gathers Jake and Natalie for a confession that surprises them both. "I have something to admit to you two lovebirds," she says with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "I may have helped some of your romantic moments along." Jake and Natalie exchange puzzled glances. "What do you mean, Ruby?" Natalie asks curiously. Ruby chuckles softly. "That storm that trapped you in the barn together," she reveals. "I may have known it was coming and made sure you were both out there at the right time." Jake stares at his grandmother in amazement. "You manipulated us?" he asks, but he's more amused than angry. "I helped fate along," Ruby corrects with a grin. "Your grandfather and I always believed you two were perfect for each other." She reaches over and pats their hands. Sometimes love needs a little push in the right direction. As the sun sets over their saved ranch, Jake and Natalie take a quiet walk together to process everything that has happened. "I can't believe we almost lost all of this," Natalie says, looking around at the beautiful property. "I can't believe I almost lost you," Jake replies, taking her hand. "When I saw that fire spreading toward the stables, all I could think about was saving our horses," he admits. "But when I was trapped under that beam, all I could think about was you." Natalie stops walking and turns to face him. "We make a good team," she observes with a smile. "We saved each other and the ranch." Jake nods, pulling her closer. "Think we can handle whatever comes next?" he asks. As long as we face it together, Natalie replies confidently. They stand together watching the sunset, both knowing their biggest challenges are behind them. Their peaceful moment is interrupted when Hannah arrives to make amends for her behavior. I owe you both an apology, she says humbly as she approaches the porch. I was selfish and tried to come between you when I should have been supporting my friends. Jake and Natalie exchange glances before Jake responds. Hannah, we understand, he says gently. Love makes people do crazy things sometimes. Hannah looks directly at Natalie with genuine remorse. I was threatened by you because I knew Jake would fall for you the moment he really saw you, she admits. You're perfect for him in ways I never could be. Natalie steps forward with compassion. Hannah, Jake cares about you as a friend, she says kindly. That will never change. Hannah nods with tears in her eyes. I want you both to be happy, she says sincerely. You deserve each other. The chapter ends with an impromptu celebration as Tommy and Elena return with incredible news about their investor meetings. We did it, Tommy announces as he bursts through the front door. We have enough investors committed to fund the entire resort project. Elena follows behind him with champagne and a huge grin. We don't need Marcus's money or the marriage fund, she adds excitedly. We can save the ranch on our own terms. Ruby claps her hands with delight. I knew you children would figure it out, she says proudly. Jake and Natalie look at each other with amazement and relief. So we could call off the marriage requirement? Natalie asks. Jake takes her hands in his. We could, he says with a smile. But I don't want to. He drops to one knee right there in the living room. Natalie Brooks, will you marry me for real this time? He asks. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Natalie's eyes fill with happy tears as she realizes their love story is just beginning. With only 30 days remaining before the ranch foreclosure deadline, Jake and Natalie decide to move forward with their wedding plans. I can't believe we're actually doing this, Natalie says, looking at the calendar with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Getting married in a month seems crazy. Jake takes her hands across the kitchen table. Everything about our relationship has been crazy, he points out with a grin. Why stop now? They spread wedding planning books and venue photos across the table. I want something simple, Natalie insists. Just family and close friends here on the ranch. Jake nods in agreement. This place means everything to us, he says. It only makes sense to start our marriage here. Ruby enters the kitchen with fresh coffee. Did someone say wedding? She asks with delight. I haven't planned a good wedding in decades. Jake and Natalie head into town to apply for their marriage license and make their relationship legally official. Full name? The clerk asks routinely. Natalie Catherine Brooks. Natalie responds, then glances at Jake with a smile. Soon to be Sullivan. The clerk continues processing their paperwork. Any previous marriages for either party? She inquires. No, ma'am, Jake answers. This is the real deal for both of us. As they sign the official documents, the reality of their commitment hits them both. Are you sure about this? Natalie whispers to Jake. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he whispers back. The clerk stamps their license with official approval. Congratulations, she says warmly. You have 30 days to complete the ceremony. Jake and Natalie exchange meaningful looks. 30 days to save their ranch and start their new life together. Word spreads quickly through the local community, and people begin arriving to help with wedding preparations. I brought flowers from my garden, announces Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor. And my husband's setting up tables in the barn. Hannah arrives with a van full of decorating supplies. I know I caused some trouble before, she says to Natalie directly, but I want to help make your day perfect. Natalie is genuinely moved by the gesture. Thank you, Hannah, she says sincerely. That means everything to me. Even former skeptics from town show up to lend a hand. Guess we were wrong about you city folk, admits Bob Miller, Frank's former ally. You and Jake belong together. The entire community rallies around them, transforming the ranch into a wedding venue. I've never seen anything like this. Elena marvels as she watches neighbors work together. Tommy works frantically to finalize all the legal and financial arrangements before the wedding deadline. The investor contracts are almost ready, he tells Elena as he types rapidly on his laptop. But we need everything signed and executed before the bank's foreclosure date. Elena reviews architectural permits and construction timelines. If we can get married and access the grandfather's fund as backup, she calculates, we'll have multiple safety nets in place. Tommy nods while printing contracts. The beauty is that we don't actually need the marriage fund anymore, he explains. But having it available gives us breathing room. He looks up from his work. Jake and Natalie can marry for love, not necessity. Elena smiles at the romantic notion. Their grandfather would be so proud, she observes. His plan worked perfectly, just not the way he expected. Meanwhile, Marcus makes one final desperate attempt to stop the wedding through legal channels. There has to be some way to challenge this ridiculous will, he demands of his expensive lawyer. The marriage requirement is clearly coercive. The attorney reviews the documents carefully. I'm afraid the will is ironclad, he admits reluctantly. The grandfather's lawyers anticipated every possible challenge. Marcus paces angrily around the office. What about proving the marriage is fraudulent? He suggests desperately. If they're only marrying for money. The lawyer shakes his head firmly. From what I understand, they're genuinely in love now, he explains. Even if the arrangement started as business, it's evolved into something real. Marcus realizes his last hope is slipping away. So, there's nothing we can do? He asks in defeat. Nothing legal, the attorney confirms. You'll have to accept that you've lost this one. Elena orchestrates the transformation of the old barn into a stunning wedding venue. String those lights in a canopy pattern, she directs a group of volunteers. And we want the flowers clustered around the altar area. The rustic barn becomes magical under her artistic vision. This is incredible, Natalie gasps as she sees the progress. It's like something from a fairy tale. Elena beams with pride at her creation. Rustic elegance, she explains. All the charm of the original ranch with touches of sophistication. Ruby surveys the decoration progress with tears of joy. It's more beautiful than I ever imagined, she says emotionally. Your grandfather would have loved seeing this place transformed by love. Tommy joins them, taking a break from legal paperwork. 2 more days, he announces. Everything's falling into place perfectly. The community effort has created something truly special. The night before the wedding, Natalie tries on her dress with Elena and Ruby's help. It's perfect, Elena declares as she adjusts the simple but elegant gown. You look absolutely radiant. Ruby wipes tears from her eyes as she watches. You remind me of myself on my wedding day, she says softly, full of hope and ready to take on the world. Natalie studies herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the confident woman looking back. A year ago, I never could have imagined this, she admits. Living on a ranch, marrying a cowboy, planning a life so different from everything I thought I wanted. Elena squeezes her hand supportively. Sometimes the best things are the ones we never planned for, she observes wisely. Ruby nods in agreement. Your grandfather knew you belonged here before you knew it yourself. Natalie feels overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that brought her to this moment. On the morning of the wedding, Jake and Tommy prepare together in the ranch house. You nervous? Tommy asks as he helps Jake with his tie. Terrified, Jake admits honestly, but in the best possible way. He looks out the window at the decorated property. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. Tommy claps him on the shoulder encouragingly. It's real, man, he assures him. You and Natalie found something special. Jake adjusts his jacket nervously. I just want to be the husband she deserves, he says quietly. I want to make her happy for the rest of her life. Tommy grins at his soon-to-be brother-in-law. Trust me, he says confidently. You already do. A knock at the door interrupts their moment. Jake, Ruby calls out. Your bride's ready when you are. Jake takes a deep breath and nods to Tommy. Let's go get married. The wedding ceremony takes place in the beautifully decorated barn as the entire community gathers to witness their love. Dearly beloved, the minister begins as Natalie walks down the makeshift aisle. We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Jake and Natalie. Jake's breath catches as he sees Natalie approaching in her stunning gown. "You're beautiful," he whispers as she reaches the altar. "You're not so bad yourself, cowboy," she whispers back with a smile. The minister continues with the traditional ceremony. "Do you, Jake Sullivan, take Natalie to be your lawfully wedded wife?" he asks. "I do," Jake responds with unwavering conviction. "Do you, Natalie Brooks, take Jake to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Natalie says, her voice strong and clear. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The minister smiles broadly. "You may kiss your bride." The reception celebration continues late into the evening as the newlyweds are surrounded by love and support from their community. "I can't believe we pulled this off," Natalie says to Jake as they dance their first dance as husband and wife. With one day to spare before the foreclosure deadline, Jake adds with relief, "We actually did it." The lawyer arrives during the reception with the final paperwork. "Congratulations," he announces to the crowd. "With the marriage now official, I can release the $2 million fund tomorrow morning." The crowd erupts in cheers and applause. "The ranch is saved," someone shouts. But Jake and Natalie barely hear the celebration around them. "We don't even need the money anymore," Natalie observes, thinking of their investor funding. "The best part is that we would have gotten married anyway," Jake replies. "Money or no money, I would have chosen you." Ruby raises her glass for a toast. "To love conquering all obstacles," she declares. "And to new beginnings." 6 months later, the Double Creek Resort is thriving beyond everyone's wildest dreams. "I can't believe how much this place has changed," Natalie says as she surveys the property from horseback. "We have bookings solid through next year." Jake rides beside her, both of them now comfortable in their respective roles as co-owners. "The wedding packages alone are bringing in more money than we ever made with just cattle," he marvels. Guests can be seen enjoying various ranch activities, horseback riding lessons, cattle drives, and romantic sunset dinners. "And the best part is we kept everything authentic," Jake continues with satisfaction. "It's still a real working ranch, just with better amenities." Elena waves to them from the main lodge, where she's consulting with new clients. "Your friend really outdid herself with the design," Jake observes. "She made this place magical without losing its soul." Natalie has transformed from a clumsy city girl into a skilled cowgirl who can handle any horse on the ranch. "Keep your heels down and shoulders back," she instructs a group of nervous guests during a riding lesson. "Remember, the horse can sense your confidence." One guest looks amazed. "You make it look so easy," she comments admiringly. "Trust me, I was worse than all of you combined when I started," Natalie laughs. "I once got chased by a rooster and fell off the gentlest horse in Texas." The guests laugh as she demonstrates proper riding technique. "The secret is practice and patience," she continues, "and having a good teacher." She glances toward Jake, who's working with the cattle in the distance. "My husband taught me everything I know about ranch life." Her voice carries obvious love and pride when she mentions Jake. Jake has successfully embraced modern business methods while maintaining the ranch's traditional values. "The new inventory tracking system is saving us hours every week," he tells Tommy during their monthly business review. "But we're still doing the actual ranch work the old-fashioned way." He shows Tommy the computer screens displaying cattle records, guest reservations, and financial projections. "Technology handles the paperwork, so we can focus on what really matters," Jake explains. "Taking care of the animals and the land." Tommy nods approvingly at the financial reports. "Profit margins are incredible," he observes. "You two have built something really special here." Jake leans back in his chair with satisfaction. "The best part is that we're preserving ranch traditions while making them accessible to people who've never experienced this lifestyle." His phone buzzes with a text from Natalie. "Speaking of traditions, my wife's calling me to help with the afternoon cattle drive." Tommy and Elena have found love with each other and decided to make Texas their permanent home. "I never thought I'd leave New York," Elena admits as she and Tommy prepare dinner together in the ranch house kitchen. "But this place has a way of growing on you." Tommy chops vegetables while Elena stirs sauce on the stove. "Plus, I get to practice law in a place where people actually appreciate honesty and hard work," he adds, "instead of just billable hours and corporate politics." Elena laughs at his observation. And I get to design authentic spaces instead of sterile office buildings, she says. Every project here has heart and meaning. Tommy stops his chopping to kiss her cheek. Think we should tell Jake and Natalie our news tonight? He asks with a grin. Elena touches her stomach subtly. I think they're going to be thrilled to become aunt and uncle, she whispers. Hannah has found happiness with Dr. Michael Torres, a veterinarian from a neighboring town who shares her passion for animal care. The new breeding program at Double Creek is really impressive, Michael comments as they review vaccination schedules. Jake and Natalie are doing everything right. Hannah smiles genuinely when she talks about her former crush. They're perfect together, she says without any trace of jealousy. I'm just glad I got out of my own way and let them be happy. Michael studies her face carefully. Any regrets? He asks gently. Only that I wasted so much time being jealous instead of being a good friend, Hannah admits. But Jake and Natalie forgave me, and now I have you. She reaches over and squeezes his hand. Sometimes the heart knows what it needs, even when the mind is confused. Michael brings her hand to his lips. I'm grateful for your confused heart, he teases. It led you right to me. Ruby has become the beloved ranch grandmother figure for resort guests, sharing stories and wisdom with everyone who visits. Now, this old ranch has seen 3 generations of love stories. She tells a captivated audience around the fireplace. And I helped write every single one of them. Guests lean forward eagerly to hear her tales. Jake's grandfather proposed to me right here in this very room. She continues with a twinkle in her eye. But I was too stubborn to say yes until he'd proven himself for a whole year. An elderly guest raises her hand. What changed your mind? She asks. Ruby chuckles warmly. He learned to make my grandmother's biscuit recipe, she reveals. Any man willing to spend a year perfecting biscuits was worth marrying. The crowd laughs appreciatively. The secret to lasting love is finding someone who will go to ridiculous lengths to make you happy. She looks around the room with satisfaction. And that's exactly what Jake and Natalie found in each other. Marcus's business empire has collapsed due to his unethical practices, and he faces serious criminal charges. Former investment executive Marcus Reed was sentenced today to 5 years in federal prison, the news reporter announces, for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal real estate schemes. Jake and Natalie watch the news coverage from their living room. I feel sorry for him, Natalie says surprisingly. He had everything money could buy, but he never understood what really matters. Jake nods thoughtfully. He was so focused on winning that he forgot how to live, he observes. We could have ended up like that if we hadn't found each other. The reporter continues. Reed's victims included several rural communities targeted for development schemes. Natalie turns off the television. I'm grateful we escaped that life, she says firmly. This is so much better than anything Marcus could have offered me. Frank Morrison is serving his sentence for arson and criminal mischief, finally paying for his crimes against the community. In a brief scene, we see him in prison, his cowboy swagger replaced by the reality of his situation. Should have minded my own business, he mutters to his cellmate. Those city folks turn out tougher than I thought. His cellmate ignores him, uninterested in his self-pity. Frank stares out the small window, realizing too late that his jealousy and greed cost him everything he claimed to be protecting. 5 years, he says to himself. By the time I get out, that ranch will be the most successful business in the county. The irony isn't lost on him that his attempt to destroy Jake and Natalie actually brought the community together and made their love stronger. His legacy will be remembered as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of envy and sabotage. The scene shifts to a beautiful sunset ride where Natalie, now visibly pregnant, rides slowly beside Jake as they supervise a wedding taking place at their resort. Can you believe we're going to be parents? Jake asks with wonder, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. After everything we've been through, it feels like a miracle. Natalie glows with happiness as she watches the bride and groom exchange vows in the distance. Our baby will grow up knowing what real love looks like, she says contentedly. Between us, and between this community that supported us. They watch as the wedding guests celebrate, many of whom helped with their own wedding just months before. Do you think Grandpa will be proud? Natalie asks quietly. Jake's voice is filled with emotion as he responds. I think he's watching over us right now, knowing his plan worked perfectly. They sit together on horseback, silhouetted against the magnificent Texas sunset. The final scene shows the ranch in all its glory as multiple events happen simultaneously: a wedding ceremony, a corporate retreat, and a family reunion. From 1 to 10, how blessed do you feel? Jake asks Natalie as they stand on their porch watching the activity. Infinity, Natalie replies without hesitation. We have love, family, success, and a baby on the way. She gestures to the bustling property. Plus, we're helping other people create their own love stories. Tommy and Elena join them on the porch, Elena's pregnancy just beginning to show. Think our kid will want to run this place someday? Tommy asks with a grin. They'll have to fight me for it. Jake jokes. I'm never leaving this ranch again. Ruby appears with fresh lemonade for everyone. Your grandfather would say his work here is done, she announces with satisfaction. 2 broken hearts found healing. A failing ranch became a thriving business, and love conquered every obstacle. As the camera pulls back, we see the Double Creek Resort in its full glory. Jake comments that Grandpa would be proud, and Natalie responds that she finally understands home isn't a place, it's where the family you choose to love is. What an incredible journey this has been. Thank you so much for watching our story. Tell us in the comments what you thought about Jake and Natalie's love story. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing tales that prove love truly conquers all. Until next time, remember that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places.